Hey ghouls, I just got back from seeing Evil Dead Burn. I really enjoyed the movie and let's get into my review. So we start off with two men that are on a fishing trip and they're on a lake which I believe is the same lake from Evil Dead Rise. So while one of the friend goes and does something, the other one is attacked by her. She comes out of the lake, uses the fishing wire and hook and drags him in. The other friend comes back and is like, "Oh, where did my friend go?" He gets in the boat, notices her, and then she capsizes it and then boils the lake with him in it. And that was really, really gruesome. So she ends up walking to the main road and walks in front of a car and gets hit by it. And then it flashes to our main characters at the club and we're introduced to them. So yeah, we're introduced to Alice, Will, Thea, and Joseph. They're celebrating Joseph's birthday. Joseph and Will are brothers. And then Ty is married to Joseph. And then Alice is married to Will. Will and Alice end up getting in a huge fight about kids and their future, and that she keeps smoking cigarettes and he doesn't want her to. Well, he gets angry enough that he gets behind the wheel of a car drunk, and he is actually the one who hits that deadite from the lake. What's really dark and twisted about this whole thing is that the deadites were actually after Will and his family because his great-grandfather was part of a whole society called the Old Wise Men who, were trying to stop the evil that is the Evil Dead. And so when you find out that they're after him, and that was the whole point of this whole situation, and how demonic this deadite is, and just the fire and just the horror, it is a very, very effective scene. Alice ends up going to the funeral, of course, because it was her husband, and with the family, and they're at the cremation center, and there's a little bit of comedy added into this scene, but then also Will makes kind of his first appearance as a deadite. So we end up going back to Joseph's house that he inherited from his parents, and that's just kind of where the final and mid acts of this movie take place. This is also where we learn about their grandfather, who was part of the Old Wise Men Club and was, abandoning his family to find, the reason behind the evil of the Deadites and, what was the purpose of the Book of the Dead and the Kandorian dagger. And they all end up having dinner together, but I can't remember exactly why, but the dad is, part Deadite, and he ends up getting so enraged, and it's really graphic and gruesome, but he ends up offing the dog, and I couldn't even watch. I wanted to cry. It was horrible. He also ends up attacking himself, so his son Joseph and his girlfriend or wife have to bring him to the hospital, but on their way, he ends up attacking her and, stabbing her and trying to choke her out, and then attacks his son, and he ends up offing his son's girlfriend, and it is just so gruesome, so intense, and every moment I was just hoping they were gonna make it through, but unfortunately she doesn't. But his son escapes back to the house. And this is when we get one of the most infamous scenes from the trailer, where she comes in and she was stabbed through the head with the seat of the car. She pulls it out and then she goes up to the candle and drinks the candle wax and says, "Cheers to your perfect family." And she is definitely an iconic deadite. Out of all the ones in this movie, I definitely thought she did the best and had the most to work with. And at this point, it's fully established that the deadites want the Kandorian dagger because they know who the grandpa was, and they aren't going to stop until they get what they want. And after a really long struggle, they end up getting her into the basement and locking her there. And they almost fall for it and feel bad, but luckily they listen and they just leave her down there. There is the grandma character named Patty who, bless her soul, but she has dementia, and she hears Ty / the deadite down in the basement wanting her help, banging on the door. And so she goes, and there's this whole thing where she's like, "Oh, you owe me money," and she thinks that this girl was her money because she has dementia. And so she unlocks the door, and the poor thing, obviously doesn't know what's going on and then gets knocked over. And we see the deadite doing some interesting things. And unfortunately, Joseph is attacked by his girlfriend and the Deadite, pushed down onto the dishwasher, and like the knives and forks are standing up, and that was like a really brutal scene from the trailer as well. But yeah, unfortunately he has to off her. He grabs like the tray from the dishwasher and just smashes her head multiple times, and really gruesome, which I know is repetitive because this whole franchise is gruesome, but that was one of the moments where it was like, whoa, they did not hold back at all. We then get into this like really weird part where the grandma is a Deadite, and she like is floating and convincing the mom to like let her husband, who's locked outside, that they know is a Deadite, and like convincing her to be like, oh, your family will be together. You just have to like come together and like basically accept the abuse and like the Deadite like behavior. And so the mom is dumb and like goes to the window and opens it, and they start making out and like exchanging fluids like while they're kissing, and it's really, 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 really gross. And that's what really leads us into our final act, where it's Alice against the whole family. Like, unfortunately, they all turn into Deadites, and, you know, there's like an epic scene on the roof, and they're chasing through the home, and the dog is a Deadite, and she slays the dog, which is unfortunate, but it had to be done. And I just think this third act was like a really, really strong third act for a final, I almost said a Final Destination film. So Alice's husband Will ends up coming back as a Deadite, of course, but in like a very ashed, burnt form, which makes sense for the title of the movie. And that's when it's revealed that like there's a lot of trauma that came from their relationship. Like, he spilled boiling water on her on purpose and gave her a permanent scar. And this couple that in life and death, like, he refuses to leave her alone, is like essentially what the message of this final act is, because he literally says that. And I wasn't expecting Evil Dead to go down this realm, which I guess I should have, because they do deal with like different traumas throughout different movies. And, you know, Evil Dead 2013 was about addiction, and then Evil Dead Rise, like, it was about motherhood and, you know, family dynamics. And the movie ends with like the police and ambulances coming, which I don't even know how they came, but it is hinted at heavily that she is part Deadite, just like the father was. So if you look at her eye, it definitely gives that vibe, and then the other one is regular, and then she gives this like haunting stare. So it is a very unique take on this franchise, because we've never had a final girl or survivor also be a Deadite in the end. And that's how the movie ends. I personally really thought it was a really, really good installment in the franchise. I love that they leaned into the more spooky, scary instead of silly. I went with one of my old friends. We both gave it an 8 out of 10. What would you guys give it? And what did you think of the post-credit scene as well? I didn't really enjoy it that much, but some people did. It didn't really make that much sense, though.